What's up, everybody? Hockey Time here, back really for my first video of the offseason. It has been a long while. Haven't done any real NHL content in well over a month and some change now. Got pretty burnt out of the nightly recaps. I'm sure they got pretty boring for you guys as well, so I figured better to dust my hands of that and move on to something different. So today I'm going to go through the free agency, or at least the first day of it, some moves that took place at and before the draft, and kind of give my thoughts on hopefully all 32 teams. I'm going to try to be pretty quick here. I may be under a minute for each team, but we'll see whether or not I'm able to do that. I can yap, so we'll see how that goes. But first things first, going west to east, we're going to start with the Ducks, and that should be pretty easy because they've really done nothing. I expect them at some point to do something with both Trevor Zegras and John Gibson, but for now, there really hasn't been much. They had a pretty good draft, I felt, but all in all, not really anything too exciting going on in Anaheim. On to Calgary. A couple smaller moves for them. They get Ryan Lomberg, Jake Bean, and Anthony Mantha, all guys that will probably be on their roster to start the 24-25 season. And of course, they finally move off of Jacob Markstrom. They pick up a first and Kevin Ball from New Jersey in that trade. I mean, I think it's a win for the Devils, but they had to get assets back. It was known everywhere that he wanted out of Calgary, so kind of did what they could there to make the best of that situation. All in all, hasn't been the most exciting free agency period for them. It's not the most exciting time in the franchise in general for the Flames, so we'll see what they're able to do the rest of the offseason leading in to the regular season. Edmonton coming off of a heartbreaking Cup final defeat. Couple big names here. I mean, Victor Arvidsson's an interesting one. Corey Perry, if you want to call that a big name, is the other, quote, big name, just because this is probably his last hurrah. But Victor Arvidsson, 2 years, $4 million per. He'll probably be on the wing of one, if not both, Draisaitl and McDavid at points during the year, and he's probably going to rack up a ton of points doing that. That's the biggest one for them. I don't hate this signing. I think $4 million is reasonable for a guy that, again, is going to rack up a ton of points playing alongside McDavid, but we'll see whether he can stay healthy and stay consistent. That's been his biggest struggle over the last couple seasons. They also signed Josh Brown and Colin Delia, likely to be an AHL guy there. Colin Delia and Josh Brown should get some time. They don't re-sign Vinny Desharnais, so he could replace him, but we'll see what happens there for Edmonton, looking to maintain much of their core from this past season. So I just got back from the rink to record the rest of this, and I missed some more stuff. 2 Edmonton Oilers signings. The first, Jeff Skinner for $3 million, a one-year deal there, and then another deal for Adam Henrique in Edmonton. This one, 2 years, $3 million. They're loading up for another cup run in their top 6 now, looking pretty dynamite, and they have a really, really solid 1-2-3 at center with McDavid, Draisaitl, and Henrique now. In Los Angeles, and this was a weird one, they move on from Cam Talbot, they bring in Darcy Kemper, they move on from Pierre-Luc Dubois, and now in free agency today, Warren Foegele and Joel Edmondson at a 3.35 mil, or excuse me, 3 by 3.5 for Foegele, and then 4 by 3.85 for Edmondson. I really don't like that contract. Fogel's is okay, I don't really hate that, but neither of these pieces are real needle movers for Los Angeles, so an interesting season coming up for them. We'll see kind of how all these moves work. I feel like some of them are gambles. I mean, their core is largely still in place, so not the biggest, dartboard throw here for them, but Kemper definitely feels that way as your number one goalie, and we'll see whether he can stay healthy and stay consistent, 2 things he, like Arvidsson, struggled with in the last couple of seasons. San Jose, actually building a decent little group here to play around Macklin Celebrini and probably Will Smith. We don't know for sure that they're both committing, but it's very likely to go that way. Tyler Toffoli, 4 years, $6 million. He gets a nice little payday, and he's going to get to be around some exciting young players. Alex Wenberg, 2 years, $5 million per. So good stuff there for the Sharks, putting some talent around their younger guys to hopefully insulate them a bit and make things tolerable for the fans as well. I like this from San Jose, to be honest. I think it's been a pretty successful week or so here for Mike Greer. He brings in Jake Wallman and a second rounder for nothing. He's made a lot of moves recently that have just made the Sharks team a lot better pretty quickly, and frankly been a big fan of what he's done so far this offseason. Seattle Kraken, Brandon Montour, 7 by 7.14 mil, and Chandler Stevenson, 7 by 6.25 million. Those are 2 big boy contracts, and we'll see how both of them pan out. I really don't know how well that Chandler Stevenson one especially is going to age. Brandon Montour a bit younger, so that one could be a little bit more tolerable in the later years, but Stevenson, 7 by 6.25 is a lot of money to throw at a guy that's already 30, so we'll see what happens there. It does, again, add talent to a team that needs it pretty desperately. allows Matty Beniers to kind of develop on that second line. I think Stevie will be the first line guy for them. They'll probably bounce back and forth throughout the year, but all in all, I think this talent-wise is a lot of what Seattle needs, but we'll see whether or not it ends up working out contract-wise in the long term. Vancouver, they of course were hoping to get Jake Gensel. The 11th hour, Tampa Bay kind of swoops in. We'll talk about that in a bit, but their I guess second place prize is Jake DeBrusk. I don't even know if he would have been the second place prize, to be completely honest here, but he goes 7 years, $5.5 million. They also get Danton Heinen, Kiefer Sherwood, and Derek Forbort to round out their free agent moves today. They did, of course, lose the likes of Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, Ian Cole, so some holes to fill for sure in Vancouver. Heinen, a decent depth guy. Derek Forbort can pretty easily, I think, replace at least a good chunk of what Ian Cole did for them. And then Jake DeBrusk, of course, the wing help that Elias Pettersson has needed for a long time now. I don't know where this leaves this team as far as comparison to last season, though. It's hard for me to look at this roster and say that they're better than they were to end last year, but we'll see what happens there. They also lose out on Casey DeSmith. Artur Silovs is probably going to come in and be the backup next year, which is not the worst thing in the world, assuming Demko can stay healthy, but we'll see what happens for Vancouver. I'm really not in love with what they did, but we'll see if it pays off. And the Golden Knights lose out Marchessault. They bring in Zach Aston Reese. That's the only real big move they've made, aside from the Logan Thompson trade to Washington. They really haven't been overly active, which is surprising because Vegas is always in on everybody. But so far in this offseason, not so active. They could still bring in a guy like Jeff Skinner. I think that could be some good help to them, but we'll see what they end up doing the rest of the way here. Again, we are only at July 1. On to the Central Division, and this division, in my opinion, a lot more interesting than the Pacific. Starting things off, Chicago adds Bertuzzi, Teravainen, Brossoit, Maroon, and Craig Smith. I really like both these Bertuzzi and Teravainen deals. Bigger numbers than they probably would have gotten elsewhere in the league, but again, they have some cap room here in Chicago. They're looking for, similarly to San Jose, some talent to insulate their young guys, and I think they do a pretty good job here of doing that. They also add a much better backup goalie in Laurent Brossoit. He will probably be 1A, 1B with Peter Mrazek this year, which is a much better situation than it was with Arvid Soderblom. All respect to that guy, of course. And then Pat Maroon and Craig Smith, some depth, veteran presence that this Blackhawks team, again, not dissimilar to San Jose, needs pretty desperately. All in all, I like what they did here. I think, it's some big dollars to throw out to some of these guys that, again, otherwise would not have gotten it if they were going to contenders, but I think they'll be happy to get the money. Turbo, of course, has a history in Chicago. I'm sure he'll be happy to be there around that young talent and see what they can build over the 3 years for him and the 4 years for Bertuzzi. But again, I'm a pretty solid fan of what Chicago did here. We'll see how it turns out as Bedard and their other young pieces develop. Colorado, the Avs are in straight-up cap hell. Of course, the Landeskog and Nichushkin deals not helping them at all. They do re-sign Jonathan Drouin, which was kind of in doubt throughout the day here. 1 year, $2.45 million. And the rest of these pieces are really just depth adds. Jacob McDonald, Calvin DeHaan, Joel Kiviranta, Parker Kelly. No big names there for Colorado. Kind of sitting stagnant in a division where a lot of teams made some real big moves. So I don't really love that if I'm an Avs fan, but they only had so much to work with, and I think Drouin was probably the best they were going to get for that price, and of course the chemistry he has with Nathan McKinnon. Dallas, I really didn't love what Dallas did either. They, of course, lose Chris Tanev. They bought out Ryan Suter, and then they bring in Matt Dumba, 2 years, $3.75 million. Ilya Lyubushkin, 2 years, $3.25 million. They lose Scott Wedgwood, bring in Casey DeSmith to replace him. Kind of a wash there. They do get Matt Duchene back, and then Brendan Smith for a year at $1 million. It's hard for me to look at this Dallas team and say they're better than they were last year. They, of course, lose Joe Pavelski to retirement. That was an inevitability. Not really much management can do about that. They'll bring in some guys from the AHL. Logan Stankoven will have a full season. I just don't know if this Dallas team is going to have the same firepower. They're still going to be a very good team, don't get me wrong, but just minor details here that are costing them in the margins, and we'll see how much it ends up affecting them over an 82-game season. And, of course, there could still be some moves made here, so we'll see what happens in Dallas. Minnesota, one of, if not the most disappointing teams of free agency, if I'm in that fan base. Their only ad really worth sustenance here is Yakov Trenin, and it's 4 years, $3.5 million. It's not of sustenance because it's a good deal. That is a really large overpayment, I think, for a guy that's probably a fourth liner, maybe a third liner. And then Travis Boyd from the Utah Hockey Club gets claimed up 1 year, $775,000 for him. That's a good center ad on the fourth line. They'll take that all day. Boyd has had some impact in Arizona previously, but that Trennan deal is a tough one from Billy Guerin after having a pretty good draft weekend, I thought. So tough to end that out. We'll see if they have some other moves in place here. There is, of course, a lot of speculation around Philip Gustafsson. Will he move now that they're looking to have Jesper Wallstedt up in the big leagues full time? That is, of course, to be determined. But for now, free agency day one, not the most exciting stuff from Minnesota. The Nashville Predators, and this is undoubtedly the team that made the biggest splash on day one. Steven Stamkos, Brady Shea, Jonathan Marchessault, and then throw Scott Wedgwood in there for your backup goalie as well. Stamkos 4x8, Brady Shea 7x7, and then Jonathan Marchessault 5x5.5. Wedgwood gets 2 years at $1.5 million as the backup there behind UC Saros. The biggest thing with that Wedgwood trade is it kind of puts the writing on the wall for Yaroslav Askarov, whether he wants to stay in the minors another 2 seasons. I highly doubt that, so we'll see what Nashville does with him. Of course, UC Saros locked up 8 years, $7.4 million, so interesting stuff coming for Askarov, I'm sure, but these big names coming into Nashville, it makes things super interesting. I mean, they have a pretty solid top 6 at this point. Stamkos, Forsberg, O'Reilly, Nyquist, Marchessault. It'll be very interesting to see where this team lands amongst the Central Division now, and of course they still have an elite goaltender, arguably the best in the division behind Connor Hellebuck. So we'll see what happens in Nashville. I can't imagine they have any more huge splashes coming, but you never know. I guess at this point, Barry Trotz is swinging his wallet around, and he's not afraid to do it. So love that from the Preds. Makes things very exciting for them headed into the season. St. Louis, another team that's done really nothing, complete opposite of Nashville. They bring Kasperi Kapanen back 1 year, $1 million. And I think they are at this point behind the likes of St. Louis. They might even behind Utah at this point. They got to do something because they cannot afford to stay stagnant if their hope is to make the playoffs. But right now, that's looking to be pretty in doubt. The Utah Hockey Club, aforementioned here, they bring in Ian Cole 1 year, $3.1 million. But the big splash for them at the draft was bring in Mikhail Sergachev. He gets brought in. They lose out on J.J. Moser and a pick, I believe, as well as Connor Geekie. So a big deal for them. Really solves a huge problem that they had on defense. I mean, Sean Durzee's great. He's not a number one defenseman, I don't think, and Mikhail Sergachev is probably the closest thing to that was going to be available via the open market or trade, and they scooped that up. So big stuff there from them, and it's pretty exciting times here heading into Utah, and of course, Mitch Marner has not yet moved, so who knows whether or not that is going to happen. Total disrespect for me. I completely forgot about the John Marino deal here as well for Utah. They take him from New Jersey for a pick, really. And again, a big ad for them. They fill a hole on defense, and we'll see if what they've done is enough to make them a pretty strong defensive team. Their goalie tandem, still Connor Ingram and Karel Vejmelka, so we'll see if they look to change that. But forgot about that Marino deal. Didn't want to leave that out. Last team in the Central here, the Winnipeg Jets. They bring in Kaapo Kähkönen on a 1 year deal, $1 million, and another goalie, Eric Comrie, for like his 17th trip to Winnipeg, 1 year, $825,000 additional depth support for Vezina winner Connor Hellebuck. So nothing really too crazy from the Jets. We'll see if they look to make any additional moves heading into the rest of the summer here, but for now, not the most exciting stuff from them in Winnipeg. And again, in a similar spot to St. Louis, I think this year, I don't want to call it a fluke, but I think there's going to be other teams coming up the line, especially the Nashville Predators, to make a push for them. So we'll see what else they have up their sleeves in Winnipeg. So I just did this entire Atlantic Division and was not recording, so that's fantastic. So we're going to rip through this even faster than I'm already trying to. Boston Bruins, Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, 6 years, $5 million for Zadorov, 7 years, 7.75 for Lindholm. I think both of these could end up being pretty big overpayments. They get Max Jones as a depth piece as well. It's an extremely interesting move here from Don Sweeney. Lindholm could potentially live up to that 7.75 number. Zadorov I don't ever see filling in that $5 million value, but I guess time will tell on all of these. For Boston, it's pieces they need. Don't get me wrong, they're going to fill roles as needed. I just don't know that either of these guys live up to the contracts that they're going to be paid. Buffalo Sabres, no massive moves for them. Jason Zucker, 1 year, $5 million is probably the biggest one. Gets them some pretty strong help on the wing. Sam Lafferty, 2 years, $2 million, some more center depth for them. And then Nick Aube-Kubel, a fourth line guy who tends to be pretty solid wherever he goes in the roles that he plays. So not a bad day for the Sabres, but nothing really too crazy going on for them. The Detroit Red Wings, Steve Yzerman was making moves today. He signed 2 goalies, Cam Talbot, 2 years, $2.5 million, and then Jack Campbell, 1 year at $775,000. He will probably end up in the minors. Cam Talbot, definitely not going to end up in the minors. We'll see how that rotation works out. They get Eric Gustafsson as well, 2 years, $2 million. Sheldon Dries, 2 years at $775,000, and then William Lagesson, a single year at $775,000. I'm pretty disappointed if I'm a Red Wings fan, to be honest, with the way that this went. We'll see if Stevie Y's got more up his sleeves, but all in all, not the most promising free agency for them to this point, and hard to look at that team and say they got better from the team that missed out on the playoffs by a tiebreaker. So interesting to see there for the Red Wings. Florida, their biggest move comes not in the free agent market, but in that they re-signed Sam Reinhart, and I'll throw Dmitry Kulikov in there as well. Both took very team-friendly deals. They do see Brandon Montour, likely Vlad Tarasenko, and Anthony Stolarz walking away to new homes. They bring in Tomas Nosek as a filler here, 1 year at $775,000. But of course, the biggest deal for them is Reinhart and Kulikov. This team's still going to be competitive. They still have Bob. Hopefully, fingers crossed, Spencer Knight comes back to the NHL next year and is a little bit more capable and has gone through the process he needs to get himself in a better place mentally. But all in all, the Panthers get their 2 big pieces, or 2 of their bigger pieces, taken care of, and they will look to stand pat next season. Montreal, similar deal here. They get Alex Bray-Boulet, 1 year, $775,000. Their biggest move comes in extending Uri Slafkovsky, 8 years, $7 million and some change. We'll see whether he pans out to fill that out or not. This year was his first real big season, and they had to pay him at some point. They look to do it now. They will probably save money on that if he has another big year here this upcoming season, and if not, they'll probably be worrying that he's not going to live up to that contract. It'll be a very interesting one to watch. The Ottawa Senators, another team that made their big splash before the draft and free agency. They do sign Michael Amadio and Noah Gregor, both depth guys today, but the big move for them is Linus Ullmark in a trade with Boston. They send back Jonas Korpisalo and a first-round pick, and there was one other piece in there that I'm blanking on, but they get a Vezina-level goalie who has not played a full 1A starter levels worth of games in his career, but is a career .918. So if he can make it through 55 games without getting hurt, they have a more than capable backup in Anton Forsberg, and they should be all right in goal. We'll just see whether or not they can make any other moves happen. They had a trade today with Washington as well. They offload Jacob Chikrin. They bring in, I believe it was a third-round pick, and Nick Jensen for that. Jensen, solid depth defenseman, up there in age. I think he's 34 now, so they probably won't be the most thrilled with that return, but they were going to lose him in the next offseason if they didn't, so it was probably the right time to try to get that done, just not quite the return they were hoping for. But all in all, I still think this is an improved team in the offseason. We'll just see whether or not they're able to get it done and whether they're able to get something done with Shane Pinto. The Tampa Bay Lightning, probably getting the biggest fish of free agency this year. Jake Gensel, 7 years, $9 million. They have the trade with Utah as well. Mikhail Sergachev getting sent out there. So I don't know. I have a hard time looking at this team and thinking that they're better than they were last season. Losing Steven Stamkos, they bring back J.J. Moser in the Sergachev trade, but obviously that's a downgrade 1-for-1. Some additional depth in Connor Geekie, but I just don't know that I love what this team has depth-wise and in net, frankly. I know they got Andrei Vasilevsky. How can I say I'm not happy with what they have in net? But Jonas Johansson is still their backup goalie, so we'll see whether that ends up working out for them. It's going to be a dogfight in the East once again this year, so we'll see whether Jake Gensel is a good fit. If he pairs well with Stamkos and Point, they're probably going to score a ton of points. And if not, this team's probably going to struggle to make the playoffs. It'll be a very interesting season to watch the Tampa Bay Lightning. And then the last team here in the Atlantic, Toronto, they get Chris Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson on deals that are longer in term than I probably would have liked to pay them, but either way, they're there. Tanev, 6 years, $4.5 million, OEL, 4 years, $3.5. They also get their backup goalie in Anthony Stolarz and another depth guy in Yanni Hakanpää. It's an interesting one for the Leafs. They signed Max Domi as well. They extended him 4 years. I like that deal for him. I think he belongs in Toronto, frankly, so good for him and good for the Leafs. And we'll see what else the Leafs have in store for us this offseason. Of course, Mitch Marner is the name that looms pretty much everywhere in Leafs land, so we'll see what happens there for the remainder of the offseason. But that's it for the Atlantic. All right, we made it to the Metro. I had to take a little bit of a break here, but we're here. Carolina, the first team leading us off. Nothing really crazy here. The biggest name they pick up is probably Sean Walker. They also pick up Shane Gostisbehere once again to iron out their D group after losing both Brett Pesce and Brady Shea. Up front, just Jordan Martinook getting resigned. 3 times 3.05 for Martinook. I would have expected that to come in a little bit lighter, but maybe I'm in the wrong there. And then Tyson Jost, a 1-year league min deal for him. Columbus, the only big name there is Sean Monahan. He gets reunited with Johnny Gaudreau. 5 years, $5.5 million. This doesn't solve any problems for them. It does help their center depth a bit, but they have numerous other problems that they're looking to get taken care of this offseason. And this, of course, a nice little piece to add, but doesn't really move the needle for them much whatsoever. New Jersey, one of the bigger, names or teams, I guess, that we've seen make moves over the last week or so. They, of course, pick up Jacob Markstrom in the deal with Calgary. They ship off John Marino to Utah, and then today picking up Brett Pesce and Brendan Dillon. Pesce, 6 years, $5.5 million. Brendan Dillon, 3 years, $4 million. They also grabbed Stefan Nason at 3 years, $2.75 million per. They were rumored to be in on Marchessault for a little bit on Steven Stamkos. They don't get either of those two players. They did get Paul Cotter in a trade that sent Alex Holtz and Akira Schmid to Vegas, so bolstering up their forward group a little bit, but big time bolstering up the group of defensemen. Now they have one of the better, if not maybe the best, top 6 in the Metro Division, especially a year or two from now when the likes of Luke Hughes and Shimon Nemec have a couple more development years underneath them. Really like what New Jersey did today. The New York Islanders, the most stereotypical Lou Lamoriello thing ever. One, quote, big name signing. It's Anthony Duclair, 4 years, $3.5 million. It's a nice ad for them, gives them a little bit more scoring power, but not really a huge difference maker for them. I don't think. It's like their 7th contract in the $3 to $4 million range, and it's one that has a bit of term that might see Anthony Duclair slowing down towards the end of it. We'll see how that works out for them. They do also sign Mike Riley, 1 year, $1.25 million. That's a depth D-man for them. Can't hurt. They're a very strong defensive team. The New York Rangers, not really doing all that much, and a lot of Rangers fans were not very happy. Sam Carrick is the only big free agent signing, the only one they make at all, I think. And they do make a trade with the Penguins for Riley Smith, so a little bit of help on the wing. They were also rumored to be in on a lot of the big wingers here today, and they don't really get any of those done, so the consolation prize, Riley Smith, coming over to the Blue Shirts. For Philadelphia, not really much free agent news for them whatsoever. Eric Johnson, the only true free agent signing, 1 year, $1 million, but the bigger deal for the Philadelphia Flyers, Matvei Michkov signing his entry-level contract, and he will be in Philadelphia in September for the preseason and then starting the regular season with the big league club. So big news for Philly, nothing crazy. They definitely still have a hole in net that they're going to want to try to fill one way or another. A lot of the big-name goalies are, off the board, and they were never really rumored to be in on them, but I'll be very curious to see what Danny Briere tries to do in net for the coming season. Pittsburgh, they don't have a lot of room to make a lot of moves, and that continued here today. Matt Grzelcyk, 1 year, $2.75 million. Beauvillier, 1 by 1.25. Mac Hollowell, a year at league min, and Blake Lizotte, 2 years at $1.9 million. Again, not really any crazy needle movers here for Pittsburgh. Some good depth pieces that will help them, but their problems did not really stem from their depth this season, so we'll see how much they're able to help an old and kind of injury-prone Penguins team, but neither here nor there. October will prove how this is going to look for them. And then my Washington Capitals, who made a bunch of moves over the last week or so. They ship off Darcy Kemper, bring in Pierre-Luc Dubois. That was a stunning trade, frankly. Was not expecting that whatsoever, and frankly, kind of puzzling at the time, but the more moves that Brian McClellan's made, the more I've kind of seen the picture of what he's shooting for here. They make the deal with Vegas to pick up Logan Thompson, him and Charlie Lindgren making a very cheap but very serviceable goalie tandem for the upcoming season. And then, of course, picking up Jacob Chychrun today from Ottawa in exchange for Nick Jensen and a 2025 third, I believe. Can't really complain there. They grab Andrew Mangiapane from the Flames for, I think, a 2025 second. He's probably going to end up replacing TJ Oshie. And then in free agency today, Matt Roy, 6 years, $5.5 million. A little bit pricey, the back end of that contract. Might be a little rough, but for now, it's a great signing. In my opinion, Brandon Duhaime, 2 years, $1.85 million, a good depth piece. Same to be said for Taylor Radish, 1 year, $1 million, a guy that will help round out the bottom six for the Caps. Can't really complain for them. They're going to put themselves in a position to help Ovechkin reach the goal record, maybe make the playoffs in the process. So some good stuff there from Brian McClellan. Much more active than I thought he was going to be leading into this offseason. But that is it as far as all of the moves go. I did want to do a quick winner and loser for each conference, so we'll start out west once again. Both the winner and loser actually coming from the Central Division for me. The winner, of course, the Nashville Predators, Steven Stamkos, Brady Shea, and Jonathan Marchessault. So 3 huge pieces coming in for them. They solidify their backup goalie in Scott Wedgwood. We will be very curious to see what happens with Yaroslav Askarov. And this is a team that still has futures assets. They have 2 first-round picks in next year's draft. They had their own and the first from Tampa Bay in the Tanner Jeannot deal, so they have cap room, and they can use those picks to add towards the deadline here. They're going to be a very competitive team. I think they could potentially fight for the middle division spot, maybe even for the top of the division. It'll be a much improved team from last season. And then the loser in the Central, again, it's got to be the St. Louis Blues, man. This is a team that everything coming out of their management group says they still want to contend for a playoff spot. They're not really looking to rebuild. They were close this year. They want to stay close next year. And they basically go out and do nothing. I mean, there is nothing that the Blues did that tells me they're looking to add, they're looking to improve the roster, they're looking to make a push for the playoff. Like, none of that. So the Blues, very, very disappointing. We'll see if they have anything else up their sleeve, but a lot of the big names are already off the board. And we'll see, if they're able to make anything else happen. Honorary mention here to the Edmonton Oilers, who made a late push to really round out their top 6. They're going to be an even more formidable team next year than they were this year. I'll be very curious to see what they can get done. And then in the East, I mean, there was a lot of really interesting stuff going on in the East. I think my winner has got to be the Washington Capitals from the picks they made up today, but just the trades altogether. Call me biased, but they completely overhauled their roster in the matter of 10 days, which was just mind-boggling to me. I was not expecting, again, most of these moves whatsoever. And now they have a team that should, I think, contend for the playoffs pretty comfortably. They're by no means cup contenders, but much, much improved on what they had last season. And then the loser in the East, I mean, there's a couple teams here. I think it's got to be Detroit, though. I mean, picking up 2 goalies when they already had 2 NHL goalies on the roster, not really doing much to improve their team as a whole. They do, again, add Patrick Kane, but they made that move to San Jose for Jake Wallman, giving up a second-round pick in the process, getting basically nothing back. And with that cap space, they really didn't accomplish much. So a little bit of doubt here in the Yzer plan. If I'm a Red Wings fan, for sure, we'll see, again, like St. Louis, if he has more up his sleeves. But they don't have a ton of cap space, and frankly, a lot of the big names that they would have liked to add to bolster up their offense or their defense gone into thin air now. So we'll see what happens here in the East and in the league as a whole. Is a very, very exciting first day of free agency. Hopefully you guys got to keep track of much of it. I will try to be a little bit more consistent here into the summer with the off-season content. There are more goalie uploads coming soon, so stay tuned for those. We will catch you guys soon.